Politics in the United States is practically the state religion. It's almost as big of a religion as consumption of popular culture. And politics and popular culture and things aren't necessarily a bad thing, but when they dominate your life and your worldview, it's obviously disordered. But everything in America is political. The content of movies is political, or the lack of political messaging in movies and music and sports and advertisements on the streets and anything else you can think of is itself considered to be political. Not being political is apparently a political statement. So this story today should not surprise anybody. Pope Leo XIV has said, before he became Pope, things that some Americans will not like about or retweeted on X sentiments that were in opposition to some of the things Trump and Vance said. That doesn't surprise anybody, I don't think. After all, Donald Trump is not Catholic and is not trying to run the country according to the social doctrine of the church. You can expect always some tension to be there, and that's not a bad thing at all. However, there are some who wonder if that the election of Pope Leo XIV was itself at least had some political dimension to it. After all, one of the biggest issue probably in the Western world today is migration. It's a controversial issue, and the church has, under Francis at least, come in on the side of the migrant to the point of actually ignoring Catholic social teaching on the matter. The quick version of this teaching is that, yes, we are to respect the dignity of those who flee oppression, who need help, and who try to come to your country. However, those who leave their countries to go to other places have to abide by the laws of those other countries, including on how you enter, and not becoming a burden to the system and taking advantage of any social programs and all the rest of it. It's a complicated issue. And it should be handled from prelates who talk about these things with a recognition of the complexity of it and the right of the state and of the countries in question, as well as, of course, in the post-conciliar sense, what they call the preferential option for the poor, which is the idea in Catholic social teaching, especially after Vatican II, that any political decision needs to be made with the needs of the most vulnerable and the poorest first and foremost in mind, so as not to exacerbate poverty and undermine social cohesion and the whole nine yards. We'll get to all that in a moment, but I want to show you first a prayer intention that came through my Facebook feed about an hour ago. This is shared by Michael Hitchborn of the Lepanto Institute. It says, please pray for Bishop Henry Gracida. He is the oldest living U.S. bishop at 102, and he's currently in the hospital in critical condition with a sepsis infection. Please pray for him, because I actually lost a friend about half the bishop's age to that same problem. That's not a good diagnosis for anybody, but especially not a man of 102. So please pray for Bishop Gracida. And for those who might be wondering, he was definitely on the side of resisting the modernist errors for the last several decades. So please keep him in your prayers. Now, that having been said, news broke yesterday that the American delegation to the inauguration of Pope Leo XIV will be headed by Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the two highest profile Catholics in the Trump administration. It's worth noting that the ambassador to the Vatican's nomination was blocked by Democrats using procedural means so that he would not be able to attend as the U.S. government's ambassador the inauguration of the new pope. It wasn't done for legitimate reasons. You might not want someone to be an ambassador. It was just done out of spite, and there was a huge kerfuffle on the floor of the Senate over all of this. Now, not coincidentally, congressional Democrats have a 21% approval rating with the general public, and I'm totally sure those things are not related. Here we'll go to I'll show you the official announcement of this, posted by Chad Pecknold, who is a co-founder and editor of the Post-Liberal Order, and he's a professor. He says, here's the release. For immediate release yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance will lead a U.S. delegation to Vatican City to attend the inaugural Mass of His Holiness Pope Leo XIV on Sunday, May 18th, 2025. Vice President Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance will be joined by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Mrs. Jeanette Rubio. Pope Leo XIV is the first American pope. Vice President Vance is the first Catholic convert to serve as vice president. So yes, he will be the one leading the delegation there, which isn't surprising. I would be shocked if former President Joe Biden wasn't there either. Now, if you watched yesterday, you'll notice that you'll remember that I spoke a little bit about this issue here. Can Pope Leo XIV's American citizenship, does he keep it as Pope? And the short version is yes, he can, unless he actively renounces it. But politics is going to be something that the Holy Father has to navigate. All popes find themselves entangled in politics to some degree or another. This has been true since the Church emerged from the underground in the 4th century. The Holy Father will have to navigate political waters like any of his predecessors did, and like them, there will be an attempt by some political actors to claim him as among their own. This should not surprise anybody at all. Those who have serious reservations, though, about Leo XIV may just be that he may just be a more moderate version of Francis, are concerned that he will be a willing participant in the political games that they're already trying to play with the Holy Father, that he will interject himself in American politics with the aim to push for more liberal outcomes to American elections. Time will tell on that, and if he's going to do it at any time, it'll probably be in the summer of 2028 because of the presidential election, which most observers think J.D. Vance will be running for president at that time. But the games have already started. I'm going to show you something here, and I can't play this because this show here, the Colbert, whatever Colbert's show is called these days, James Martin was the guest on it. Stephen Colbert and his network especially jealously guard copyright, even going so far as to ignore fair use, which is what this would be. If I were to play it, it would be covered under the laws about fair use. But the person who decides if you're using the copyright holder is one who decides if what you're doing is within fair use, and that doesn't always go well. So I can't play it for you. However, Colbert asks James Martin that based on what Leo has taught before, meaning when he was Cardinal Robert Prevost, what can we expect of him to do politically? I can forgive Stephen Colbert for that. He is a political actor first and foremost, and his political loyalties are very high for him. I'm not going to say that they dwarf his Catholicism, because that is a heavy accusation to make against somebody, but you can be forgiven for thinking that, I think. But James Martin here is supposed to be a priest, and yet his worldview is formed, it seems like, first and foremost, by a politicized version of modernist theology. Father James Martin says the following: he, Pope Leo XIV, will preach the gospel in season and out, which includes standing up for the poor. Then he makes a reference to Pope Leo XIII and Catholic social teaching. And he says that Leo XIV was a missionary priest and he'll be strong on immigration. But then he says this, and I'm quoting him directly: "It's interesting that Trump and Vance can no longer say that the Pope doesn't understand America. We can safely say that I don't think that's going to be the case any longer," end quote. He's giving the game away there. He's absolutely giving the game away. Not for the Holy Father, necessarily, although, again, those who have reservations about Pope Leo XIV do wonder if that was part of the calculation for him becoming Pope. It is for the Jesuits and for the modernists in America and the Supiches and the rest of them that this is the game. Whether the Holy Father will play along with this or not is anyone's guess. If he were to wade in American political waters, it might be in 2028, when it's likely that J.D. Vance will seek the presidency and will promise to keep the MAGA program going on past Trump. While men like James Martin and other church leaders could attack him legitimately on his stance on IVF, which does violate church teaching, yes, his does, and it is, we need to not be hypocrites, those of us who are conservative in a political sense or traditionalists in our worldview. We can't be hypocrites about that. When we all called out Joe Biden for being horrifyingly anti-Catholic on matters of life and death, we have to be honest and not hypocrites here. But the Jesuits are going to focus in general on immigration. They already are. I'm going to show you something that I was shocked by, because I'm used to America Magazine being a dumpster fire, honestly. But here you go to the front page right now of America Magazine. So you have here a story about immigration enforcement, where the Diocese of Nashville tells Catholics who might be on the wrong side of the law on this issue that they don't have to go to Mass on Sunday if they might actually, if this, all these enforcements apply to them. And then you have the story I covered yesterday, Pope Leo talking about talking to the Eastern Rite Catholics. And then another, I mean, I don't know what this has to do at all with the church, but America Magazine's headline, Trump, Elon Musk, and the dangers of God mode, tech powers in government. God mode is a reference to video games. There are certain video games where you enter a cheat code and you're basically invulnerable to everything your adversaries in the game throw at you. Elon Musk is famously a big video game guy. But here, I have no idea what this has to do with the Catholic Church. But they say that Doge is attempting to undermine a congressional check on presidential power. It is rewriting the Constitution. I mean, that's false in general. But again, what does this have to do with church politics? I don't know. And then another article about the Holy Father, and then about J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio attending the inaugural mass, and then something lionizing Pope Francis as a preacher. But like half of the articles here are hot button political issues. And I can't for the life of me figure out what it is they're doing except being a political news outlet. And you could be forgiven for thinking that's what they're going to do. Immigration is going to be where they try to rope the Holy Father, not only to American politics. Let's not be, focused on the United States, thinking we're the center of the universe. That's the shade of the heresy called Americanism. Leo the 13th condemned Americanism, which is part of that error is believing the United States is the shining city on the hill, that it is essentially God-ordained country to lead the world into a golden age and all that nut stuff. It's perfectly right and just to believe your country is the best in the world. You're supposed to have a filial devotion to your country, according to Aquinas and the rest. But the shining city on the hill is the church. The church is the one that's supposed to lead people into the Marian age of peace, not any particular country in general. And Leo the 13th, I remember putting the encyclical up against Americanism by Leo the 13th like 5 years ago on this channel, and people who heard it were angry because, well, we Americans in general think America has that special God-ordained mission in the world. But it's not only American politics. It's going to be international politics. The preeminent issue in the West seems to be, aside from that war in Eastern Europe that, God willing, will be resolved soon through negotiations and things, is migration. This has been an issue now for at least a decade. It's changing fundamentally European politics. I covered last fall and going into, all last year, really, the German bishops outright endorsing political parties and telling people not to vote for what would by American standards be a center-right political party, but was the most conservative party to ever gain mainstream support in Germany, to the point where the government was trying to curb your access to them. Okay. Again, by American standards, like center-right at best. But they said the nastiest thing. It was the German bishops doing this. Crazy stuff. But America Magazine is unfortunately publishing stuff like this. Headline, Pope Leo XIV faces a difficult challenge on migration. He might be up to the task. Now, again, it is perfectly right and just for the Holy Father to speak up on issues of salience to Catholic social teaching, where human dignity is in danger and all the rest. There's an assumption here that the Holy Father will side essentially with the powers that should not be, who want to erase borders and the rest of it and bring in whole large amounts of people to take care of their total lack of birth rates and make everyone into a sort of a homogenous, easy to rule hodgepodge people. They're not going to be able to do that, I think, but they assume that Leo XIV is going to be on their side because he has said things publicly before he was Pope that were against, like, Trump and Vance. Now, we don't know if he's going to continue doing that as Pope. After all, if he's the Pope of unity and peace, probably the last thing he wants to do is end up stoking fires of political dissent and things. But if he was going to do it, it would be at politically opportune times. Here's the substance of this article, written by somebody calling himself J. Kevin Appleby. When Pope Francis died on April 21st, Catholic advocates for immigrant rights felt a double loss. Not only did we lose the spiritual leader of our faith, we also lost a strong moral voice on behalf of migrants and refugees globally. When Leo XIV was elected to the papacy 2 weeks later, our hope was renewed. The new pontiff immediately identified the poor and outcast as a priority for the church. As a missionary in Peru, he has lived among the poor and has intimate knowledge of the root causes that compel persons to migrate in order to survive. By taking the name of Leo, he underscored the importance of Catholic social teaching to his papacy and affirmed that the vulnerable have the right to work and live in dignity. He seems perfectly positioned to speak with authority on behalf of migrants and refugees around the world and to continue to fight the making worldwide the theology of indifference, a fight waged by his predecessor to the plight of persons on the move. The new pope, however, will face a challenging migration situation in the world, with a record 117 million displaced persons, a record number of migrant people passing away per year, and a series of wars in the Middle East, Africa, and Europe continuing to produce refugees and displaced persons at a rapid rate. At the same time, the wealthiest nations are closing their doors to asylum seekers and severely limiting the amount of international assistance provided to the developing world. By the way, the term developing world is a very extremely condescending term because it makes the value of essentially materialist opulence, the way we live in the United States and Europe, as like the best all be all thing. And there are cultures in other places in the world who don't want any of that stuff. Yeah, they want like running water. Okay. They want water that's safe to drink and basic things, but maybe they don't want to have the latest video game console on their shelf, and they don't want to drive cars all the time or whatever. They want to live a simpler life. And usually you'll see people who say things like what's being said in this article, despite them taking an anti-capitalist stance most frequently, speaking in very condescending ways. Once you notice it, it's hard to not notice it anymore. It says, despite these challenges, and perhaps because of them, the church must continue to speak out on the issue of migration, not only from a human rights perspective, but from a pastoral one. At least 30% of migrants around the world are Christians, with more than half of them Catholic. In the United States, 80% of the immigrants who may be removed under the Trump administration are Christians, with 61% of that group being Catholic. But another challenge is that an influential minority of Catholics, both in the US and Europe, opposing the church's teaching on migration and have attempted to justify their anti-immigrant views by mischaracterizing Catholic teaching on the issue. And this is where it gets into the mind games and the mental gymnastics. You can criticize from a Catholic social teaching place justly the way that Trump and Vance have handled this. You can. But to say they're misrepresenting the church teaching on this is a bit of a stretch. Because those who say that make it sound like the church says you have to always allow anybody in who wants to come in. And don't worry about whatever it's going to do to your society when you do that. Don't worry about the lack of social cohesion, the loss of trust in society, and an increasingly angry population, and all the evil things that tend to happen when you start bringing in large groups of people like that. Don't worry about all that. The church, they make it sound like that's what the church says, but it's not true. Pope Francis's letter to the U.S. bishops opposing large-scale removals, for example, was a response to Vice President J.D. Vance's attempt to rewrite Catholic teaching on migration using Thomas Aquinas' concept of ordo amoris. Advocates for migrants see it as a positive sign that a social media account under the name of then Cardinal Prevost shared a column by America editor-in-chief Sam Sawyer, S.J., that criticized Mr. Vance on migration, a separate post from that X account citing an article in the National Catholic Reporter. So the vice president was wrong on that issue. Now, the reason he might have shared that is it's a little inside baseball stuff for people who may not know, but there is a big divide theologically almost between Augustinians and those who have a high regard for Thomas Aquinas. It's not that Augustinians don't think Thomas Aquinas was brilliant, or it's not that they don't think that he was like doctor of the church or anything else, but there are some fundamental philosophical differences there. And you might have seen some of that in the Ordo Amoris story. It's always context that they tend to leave out. And the author goes on to tell you that the Pope's going to wade into this stuff. And you see the through line here when you see that story and other stories like it, which is that, Trump bad, Orange Man bad, Vance bad. Bizarre stuff. When the dust settled and I decided to put my own reservations about the Holy Father aside and just to see what he was actually going to do before I, do anything against the man. Trump was not something that came to mind. Most of us have greater concerns about things like Fiducia Supplicans, Amoris Laetitia, and other documents promulgated under Francis that categorically violated the church's morality. Traditionis Custodes, access to the traditional mass, the liturgy in general, which is why, a couple days ago when he spoke to the Eastern Rite Catholic churches and spoke about the need for reverence in the liturgy, a lot of us applauded because it's true what he said, that we in the West need to reclaim reverence in the liturgy. Most of your liturgical wars going on would end pretty quickly if your typical Sunday parish and its typical Sunday mass was as reverent as your traditional mass. It'd be gone overnight. Most of the criticisms of the Novus Ordo would be dispelled if that was the case. But there is something about many bishops today and many older priests who don't want traditional masses. And you saw that in when Francis issued Traditionis Custodes. The letter he wrote with it to the bishops actually barred a lot of the reverent options in the Novus Ordo being used. Wild stuff. It was almost like the attempt was to keep the liturgical wars going on. And there's a near universal agreement that the liturgical wars need to end, or at least go on hold for a long time. Now, it's not only when it comes to this attempt to politicize the Holy Father and make him, on your side, meaning yours, meaning American Magazine and the Jesuits and the worst elements in the church today. It's not only the Jesuits doing this. Well, it is the Jesuits in this article too, but the secular media is getting in on this. This is from the New York Times. Guest essay, Pope Leo XIV may be a stern teacher for American Catholics. And this is written by somebody calling themselves Sam Sawyer. He was cited in a previous article, the one that we just went over. He is a Jesuit priest and editor-in-chief of Catholic magazine America. So again, the Jesuits are ground zero for this. And you have to wonder, remember, I showed you just a minute ago what America Magazine's front page looked like. It was half secular left-wing politics in a laudatory way, not a, hey, look what these, what these people are doing that are anti-Catholic. We should, no, not that. It was, orange man bad, basically. Here's Mr. Sawyer, or Father Sam Sawyer's words. Here he is, his argument in his own words. As a Jesuit, I felt sure 12 years ago that there was no real chance the cardinals would elect a Jesuit pope. As an American, I felt sure 6 days ago that there was no chance they would elect someone from the U.S. Today, I'm overjoyed at having a terrible track record for predicting the outcome of papal conclaves. Now that the initial surprise and celebrations have passed, how will American Catholics respond to Leo XIV, the first American pope and the successor of Francis, my fellow Jesuit, when they get to know him better? From what we can tell so far, those on both the left and right of the U.S. political divide are likely to be frustrated. Leo could well end up being the pope who makes it clear that the reason Catholic doctrine does not fit well into American politics is because it makes heavier demands than partisans on either side are willing to bear. And he is 100% right about that. Catholic social teaching, I guarantee you, if you're a conservative, big-time Trump supporter, or even a neoconservative, don't like Trump much, you miss the days of Mitt Romney, you're not going to like Catholic social teaching a whole lot, because there are times where it calls explicitly for a larger role of government than you're used to. And for those of you who might be watching this, hate watching this channel because you have generally secular left-wing political views, I don't think I have to explain to you why you don't like Catholic social teaching. It places a lot of emphasis on morality and private property ownership and things of that nature. Even though he is a Chicago native and a White Sox fan known to many of his friends as Bob, as an aside, please never refer to the Pope as Bob, please, even if you don't like the man, please never refer to him as that. Cardinal Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, was considered the least American of the Americans in the College of Cardinals, according to the Italian media. He has deep global experience, first in Peru as a missionary, teacher, and bishop, then in Rome as a worldwide leader of his Augustinian order, and finally at the Vatican's office for bishops, a post that was crucial for overcoming any skepticism among the electors about a candidate born in the U.S. But no matter how much he belonged to the worldwide church, Leo appears to have kept an eye on issues back home. In February, a social media account under his name shared a post concerning Pope Francis's open letter to the U.S. bishops about the Trump administration's large-scale removal agenda, including a column I wrote in which I argued that Francis's letter posed the question to American Catholics of whether we judge our politics according to the gospel or the other way around. Already, many commentators are trying to classify his positions on immigration, the sacrifice to Moloch, two-way stuff, contents of the flesh, James Martin's sin, and the rest as conservative or liberal. Mapping a pope's thinking onto the contemporary left-right political binary is doomed to fail. Again, 100% right about that, especially for a pope who was taking the name Leo XIV. The name connects him to Leo XIII, who inaugurated modern Catholic social teaching with his 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum. As an aside, channel members, Rerum Novarum was one of the first papal encyclicals I put on this channel. On those Saturday educational videos, put it up there like 7 years ago or something. In light of the election of Pope Leo XIV and his citation of Catholic social teaching, I have a representation of it. It will be live Saturday for the general public. Channel members, you have access to it now. It's a long encyclical. But if you hear it and remember its place in history, where it was, what was going on in the world at the time, it makes sense and it gives you good insight into the underlying principles that if Pope Leo XIV took the name Leo XIII with an honest embracing of his underlying principles, then you can kind of forecast what he's going to say in his forthcoming inevitable social encyclical. And he goes on, he says, in the 21st century, the Catholic Church in the United States struggles with demands for partisan allegiance that are in tension with the broader advocacy for the justice demanded by the gospel. So here you go, starting to dip his toe into liberation theology. U.S. bishops, for example, are both deeply opposed to the sacrifice to Moloch and committed to care for migrants and refugees, a combination that neither Democrats nor Republicans can readily accept. In fact, many Catholics in America do not even try to hold the church teachings on core issues. That's true also. Here's how he says that. During the 2024 election, Catholics in swing states favored Donald Trump by 5%. White Catholics voters favored him by 16%. Catholics on both sides of the political aisle in swing states were more likely to support their chosen candidate because of the positions that were most out of line with church teaching. With Trump voters motivated by his immigration policies and Kamala Harris voters motivated by her commitment to protect access to the sacrifice to Moloch. Yet many voices, both within the church and outside it, are still eager to tell Catholics that church teaching dictates for whom they must vote. Well, there's a reason for that. Because those issues are not equal. The church has said that you cannot support someone who supports legal access to that sacrifice to Moloch unless both candidates who have the best chance of winning basically support it, and then after that you have to go on to what is going to be who's going to do least amount of evil in the world. Yeah, it's a lesser of two evils argument promulgated by Cardinal Ratzinger in 2004 in response to John Kerry running for president as a Democrat and a Catholic. That's what he said. And many modernists try to say that the sacrifice to Moloch is on the same moral level as migration. Or previously they've said it about large-scale unemployment or 2A issues or other things. It's an attempt to reduce the actual importance of that issue. The U.S. bishop said it was that the sacrifice to Moloch was the most preeminent issue in the United States and in the world today. And they're not wrong about that, because it's a sin that cries out to heaven for vengeance or justice, depending on your translation of the Bible. There will be a heavy price to pay for this country if we don't stop doing this. Here's what he says. Under Leo XIV's pontificate, this kind of partisanship is likely to become an even more untenable position for American Catholics than it already is. Preaching from the most significant pulpit in the world, and he once to in English with a Midwestern accent, this pope will be a constant reminder to the church in his home country of a broader Catholic perspective that confronts and challenges our current divisions. I expect American Catholics will feel torn between a natural affinity for a native son and a frustration as his moral teachings contrast with their own views. For example, even though American Catholics remain largely positive about Pope Francis, over the course of his papacy, their attitudes towards him started to mirror their political identities. As his criticism of the Trump administration's immigration and other policies became more pronounced, perhaps it was no accident that the share of right-leaning American Catholics with an unfavorable opinion of him shot up from 2% to 35%. When similar contrasts happen with Leo, whether over immigration with the right or the sacrifice of Moloch to the left, it will not be as easy to dismiss him as someone who does not understand American culture or politics, as happened with past popes. And he goes on to say, basically to predict that our Holy Father is going to weigh in on this. And people won't like it when he does. It's going to be a challenge to everybody, but it's going to be a particular challenge to conservative American Catholics. He might be right. Although I don't necessarily think the Holy Father is going to wade in immediately. Because if he's the Pope of unity and a Pope of healing, like he says he is, he's probably going to hesitate to do that, at least for some time. But if he does do it, my prediction is it'll happen either maybe during the run-up to the midterm elections in about 15 months or so, or it'll be in 2028, in the summer or maybe September or October of that year. If J.D. Vance gets a Republican nomination and looks like he might win. Now, far be it from me to be to cite Cardinal Hollerich of all people positively, but he has the most sensible take on this. And I brought this interview with him up several times. And the headline here from Avenir: Cardinal Hollerich, we have not elected an anti-Trump pope. He will last much longer. Now, this website has a comical level of pop-ups, some of them impure and immodest, which is weird for a Catholic website. I don't have this problem on other websites when their advertising shows me. Usually advertising based on your web searches, but I promise you, I've not been looking at stuff like what they're trying to sell me here. I don't know why that they're doing it. So as to avoid exposing people to things they might not want to see, I've chosen to just keep the headline on screen for you and just quote the Cardinal directly from it. And I'll have a link to this in the show notes at returntotradition.org for your consideration if you want to read it yourself. Here's what he has to say he's first asked this question. The Pope is American and asks for bridges, also towards the migrants that the U.S. administration removes. And Cardinal Hollerich, one of the worst cardinals in the church, gives you a sensible answer. He says, answer: we have not elected an anti-Trump pope. We've chosen a man of prayer, a disciple of Jesus, a helmsman who knows how to guide the church through the waves of history. The fact that he is an American citizen is a coincidence. Also, because Donald Trump will pass, while Leo's pontificate will last a long time. Now, what he means by Donald Trump will pass is the man leaves office January 21st, 2029. The idea they put a man on the throne of Peter for 20 years, potentially, with the eye of, owning Trump is weird. It doesn't make sense a lot on paper, and this is what Cardinal Hollerich is saying. But there are broader political issues here going on. The immigration issue in America is probably the highest profile now, but if you went back 5 years, it was the biggest issue in Europe and still is, to the point where Brexit and a bunch of other political, and actually the outcome of their political elections now, are being dominated by the answer to that question, depending on the parties and candidates. Now, the interviewer here asked Cardinal Hollerich, Leo XIV repeated the word peace 9 times in his greeting to the world after his election. What message does he send? Cardinal Hollerich responds with, peace has many faces. Peace implies less antagonism. Peace needs less polarization and more dialogue. Peace needs the encounter with the other who is different from us. Only if we are truly women and men of peace in daily life will we also have relevance in political decisions. End quote. And weirdly, I agree with him again there. The Jesuits and people like them who are really desperately hoping this Pope is going to wade into the political battles at least as much as Francis did might be disappointed. Because if he's serious about peace, and I see no reason not to think that he is, then as Cardinal Hollerich says, peace implies less antagonism. Peace needs less polarization and more dialogue. Peace needs the encounter with the other who is different from us. And that will probably guide the Holy Father's way of dealing with this. Unless those who are generally not trusting the Holy Father and what he's going to do are waiting for the other shoe to drop are right. We'll find out together. But it is weird that Cardinal Hollerich, the man who coined the phrase the new synodal church, has a more sensible opinion on this than a lot of American prelates do, and a lot of American priests do. If America Magazine and the Jesuits really want to get political in a way that is constructive, they could call to task their spiritual brothers in the Episcopal Church. Recently announced that after the current fiscal year is over, they'll end all migrant resettlement contracts with the federal government because families from South Africa were given refugee status. And as such, the Episcopal Church does not want to help them. Why? Because of the color of their skin. And I'm not even joking about that. I'm not exaggerating. That's what the Episcopal Church said. They admit it. They even admit that what they think is going on in South Africa is warranted and that the white minority deserves everything that's happening. Again, I wish I was not being serious about this. But again, the Episcopal Church is essentially progressives contemplating the idea of prayer, basically. Headline from The Hill. Episcopal Church halts refugee partnership with feds over white South Africans. This is one of those things that it's just hard to wrap your brain around when you see it. There's no shame here. Again, the Hill's not very good about all these pop-ups either. The Episcopal Church has halted a refugee resettlement program with the federal government over the prioritization of white South Africans, while the other populations see their immigrant protections removed. Just over 2 weeks ago, the federal government informed Episcopal migration ministries that under the terms of our federal grant, we are expected to resettle white Afrikaners from South Africa, whom the U.S. government has classified as refugees. Presiding Bishop Sean W. Rowe said in a Monday letter. In light of our church's steadfast commitment to racial justice, that is a Marxist term, and reconciliation in our historic ties to the Anglican Church in Southern Africa, we are not able to take this step. Accordingly, we have determined that by the end of the federal fiscal year, we will conclude our refugee resettlement grant agreements with the U.S. federal government. Commitment to racial justice makes it so they can't resettle people who are actually refugees. International law says for anybody who is claiming refugee status, they have to go to the first country that's nearest to them that they can get safe harbor in. There's no place like that in Africa, and all the European countries have said no to taking them. That practically makes the United States, by default, the best option for them. And what's going on there is horrifying. I can't even begin to describe it on any modern social media platform for you. Maybe the Jesuits should apply church teaching on this, including the basic gospel message, to their brothers in the Episcopal Philosophy Club, because that's not a church. It's an activist organization. Damon Keller with a super chat. Thank you, sir. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Widespread error of two masters, God will vomit out. Spicy, but true. Now, all that having been said, the Holy Father met with the LaSalle brothers representatives yesterday. I'm going to give you his full homily here, which was delivered in Italian, but I've translated in English here. I'll have links to I'll have the links to the Italian version from the Vatican website on returntotradition.org after this broadcast. It's on the subject of the church attempting to address issues in the modern world and its changing dynamics, and yes, the church remaining relevant in the world. And if that's what he means by relevance, I don't see the problem. Here's the Italian version of this, just so you can see that it's real, not just something I'm making up. And here we go. I'll just post the English text on screen. Words of the Holy Father, given yesterday. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, peace be with you. Your Eminence, dear brothers and sisters, welcome. I'm very pleased to receive you on the third centenary of the promulgation of the bull In Apostolica Dignitatis Solio, with which Pope Benedict XIII approved your institution and its rule, January 26, 1725. This also coincides with the 75th anniversary of the proclamation by Pope Pius XII of St. John Baptist de La Salle as the heavenly patron of all educators. After 3 centuries, it is wonderful to see how your presence continues to bring the freshness of a rich and vast educational reality, through which in various parts of the world you dedicate yourselves with enthusiasm, fidelity, and a spirit of sacrifice to the formation of young people. In light of these anniversaries, I would like to reflect with you on 2 aspects of your history that I consider important for all of us: attention to current realities and the ministerial missionary dimension of teaching within the community. The beginnings of your work speak greatly of relevance. St. John Baptist de La Salle started by responding to the request for help from a layman, Adrian Nile, who was struggling to sustain his schools for the poor. Your founder recognized in this request a sign from God, accepted the challenge, and set to work. Thus, beyond his own intentions and expectations, he gave life to a new system of education, the Christian schools, free and open to all. Among the innovative elements he introduced in this pedagogical revolution, we recall teaching directed to classes rather than individual students, the adoption of French, accessible to all, as the language of instruction instead of Latin, Sunday classes which allowed young people who worked during the week to participate, and the involvement of families in educational pathways, according to the principle of the educational triangle, still valid today. Thus, the problems that arose, rather than discouraging him, spurred him to seek creative solutions and to venture down new and often unexplored paths. All this cannot but make us think, raising useful questions for us as well. What are the most urgent challenges to address in today's youth world? What values should be promoted? What resources can we rely on? The young people of our time, like those of every era, are a volcano of life, energy, emotions, and ideas. This is evident in the wonderful things they have achieved in so many fields. However, they too need help to harmoniously nurture such richness and to overcome what, though in different ways compared in the past, can still hinder their healthy development. For example, If in the 17th century the use of Latin was an insurmountable communication barrier for many, today there are other obstacles to face. Consider the isolation caused by increasingly superficial, individualistic, and emotionally unstable relational models. The spread of thought patterns weakened by relativism. The prevalence of lifestyles and rhythms that leave little room for listening, reflection, and dialogue. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. At school, in families, and sometimes even among peers, resulting in loneliness. These are demanding challenges, but like St. John Baptist de La Salle, we too can turn them into springboards to explore new paths, develop tools, and adopt new languages to continue touching the hearts of students, helping and encouraging them to courageously face every obstacle and give their best in life according to God's plans. In this sense, the attention you give your schools to the formation of teachers and the creation of educating communities, where teaching efforts are enriched by everyone's contribution, is commendable. I encourage you to continue along these paths. But I would also like to touch on another aspect of the Lasallian reality that I consider important. Teaching lived as a ministry and mission, as a consecration within the church. St. John Baptist de La Salle did not want priests among the teachers of the Christian schools, but only brothers, so that all your efforts, with God's help, would be directed toward the education of students. He loved to say, "Your altar is the teacher's desk," thus promoting in the church of his time a reality previously unknown, that of lay teachers and catechists invested within the community with a true ministry, according to the principle of evangelizing by educating and educating by evangelizing. Thus, the charism of the school, which you embraced with the fourth vow of teaching, beyond being a service to society and a precious work of charity, still appears today as one of the most beautiful and eloquent expressions of that priestly, prophetic, and kingly newness that we all received in baptism, as emphasized by the documents of the Second Vatican Council. In your educational realities, therefore, religious brothers prophetically make visible, through their consecration, the baptismal ministry that spurs everyone, each according to their Satan tasks, without distinction, to contribute as living members to the growth of the church and its ongoing sanctification. For this reason, I hope that vocations to the Lasallian religious consecration may grow, be encouraged and promoted both within your schools and beyond, and that in synergy with all formative components, they may help spark joyful and fruitful paths of holiness among the young people who attend them. Thank you for what you do. I pray for you and impart the apostolic blessing, which I gladly extend to the entire Lasallian family. And I found that one interesting in particular because Rorate Cheli posted a link to the address on X and said with the quip, Pope Leo's already working miracles. He got the Lasallians to wear their habits. Because unfortunately, in our time, all too many religious will not wear their habits in public or at all. They prefer to dress as laymen for some reason. Maybe he can be a good example with the elevated way he is dressing compared to Francis and get them to wear their habits again. Religious in general should wear their habits. Curious what you have to say about this in the comments, please, or in the live chat. We'll check here before we wrap this up. I will tell you that a focus on restoring Catholic education to its greatness is something that I hope the Holy Father does address. All right, folks. I'm curious. Again, let me know what you think about here in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Richard Korn says, "Our SSPX men wear their cassocks in public?" Yes, you'll find traditionalist groups wear their cassocks. SSPX priests do. FSSP priests do. Institute of Christ the King priests do. Traditionally minded and very conservative religious orders will, but oftentimes more modern ones have either replaced their habits entirely with street clothes, or they only wear them for ceremonial purposes, or their habits look like, for at least women religious, look like they went shopping at Hillary Clinton's Clothier. It's weird the way some of them look. But the traditional habits, I hope, make a comeback. In the same way that you see women veiling at Mass more now than you have in the last 30 years, that's making a comeback. Let's hope that same kind of, whatever spirit is moving that, moves people also in the religious orders to wear their habits more than they do. All right, folks, I'm curious what you think about this, so let me know in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It absolutely helps. Sharing this on social media helps too. And as always, pray for the church, pray for the Holy Father. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.